Justice in ancient Rome didn't always come with a gavel. It often arrived with a whip, a pit, or something far stranger. Tonight, we quietly uncover the most bizarre and unthinkable punishments ever handed down in the Roman Empire. From punishments involving animals to rituals soaked in fear and symbolism, these weren't just laws, they were warnings carved into time. And yet somehow people still slept beneath them. If eerie truths and forgotten horrors help hush your restless thoughts, you're in just the right place. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to keep wandering through the odd, the chilling, and the quietly fascinating stories history left behind, one sleepy tale at a time. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. As twilight descends upon the 7 hills of Rome, the ancient Tiber River reflects the last golden rays of sunlight, flowing ever onward as it has since before the city's first stone was laid. The river has witnessed countless stories unfold along its banks, carrying whispers of joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy, justice and retribution. In the stillness of evening, one can almost hear these whispers. Tales of a civilization that built not only magnificent structures of marble and stone, but also an intricate system of law and punishment that would influence human societies for millennia to come. Imagine yourself standing on the banks of this storied river as stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The distant sounds of the city gradually fade as night embraces Rome. It is in this tranquil moment that we begin our exploration of Roman justice, a system both sophisticated and severe, merciful and merciless, rational and at times remarkably bizarre. The foundations of Roman justice were laid not in cruelty or caprice, but in the pragmatic soil of a society seeking order amidst the chaos of human nature. The earliest Romans understood that for a community to thrive, there must be consequences for actions that harmed the collective welfare. This understanding gave birth to the 12 Tables, Rome's first formal legal code, created around 450 BCE and displayed publicly in the Forum for all citizens to see. Let all know the law and heed its commands, these ancient tables declared, establishing a revolutionary concept that laws should be transparent and accessible, not hidden mysteries known only to the powerful. This principle, that justice must be seen to function openly, would shape Roman punishment throughout the civilization's long history. Unlike many ancient societies, early Rome approached justice with a remarkably measured philosophy. The principle of talio, similar to the concept of an eye for an eye, guided penalties for many offenses. This was not vengeance unchecked, but rather a careful calibration of punishment to match the severity of the crime. A bone broken would be answered with a broken bone. A life taken demanded a life in return. As dusk deepens into night and the Tiber continues its eternal journey, consider how the Romans expanded upon these foundations to create a justice system of remarkable nuance. They distinguished between dolus, intentional wrongdoing, and culpa, negligence, between crimes against individuals and crimes against the state, between offenses committed by citizens and those committed by slaves or foreigners. Each distinction carried implications for how punishment would be determined and administered. The soft splash of water against the riverbank reminds us of time's passage, and indeed, as Rome evolved from struggling settlement to mighty republic to vast empire, so too did its approach to justice. Early Roman punishment focused primarily on restitution, requiring offenders to make victims whole through payment or service. As the Republic expanded, punishments became more systematized and, for certain crimes, more severe. By the light of a rising moon, we see how Roman justice was inextricably tied to Roman values. Dignitas, personal dignity and reputation; pietas, duty to family, gods, and state; and gravitas, seriousness of purpose, were not merely personal virtues, but social expectations enforced through both formal and informal sanctions. To violate these values was to invite not only legal penalties, but public shame, a punishment the status-conscious Romans often found more difficult to bear than physical pain. Yet Roman justice contained contradictions as complex as the city itself. The same society that created sophisticated legal principles also staged spectacular public executions. The culture that valued dignity and restraint also devised punishments of remarkable creativity and, to modern sensibilities, cruelty. The civilization that gave us enduring concepts of equity and fairness also administered justice differently depending on one's social status. This last point deserves particular attention as we contemplate the flowing river, its dark waters now silver-touched by moonlight. In Rome, you were often determined how you would be punished. A senator convicted of a capital crime might be granted the relatively merciful sentence of exile or the dignity of suicide, while a slave guilty of the same offense might face crucifixion or condemnation to the beasts. This was not considered unjust by Roman standards, but rather a natural reflection of the social hierarchy they believed essential to proper order. The punishment should fit not only the crime, but the criminal, wrote the Roman jurist Ulpian, articulating a principle that guided sentencing throughout Roman history. High status carried both privilege and responsibility. Low status afforded neither protection nor respect when justice was administered. The night deepens around us as we stand by the timeless Tiber, and in this darkness we might reflect on how Roman punishment served multiple purposes simultaneously. It sought to make victims whole through restitution when possible. It aimed to deter potential wrongdoers through public examples. It removed dangerous elements from society through exile, imprisonment, or execution. And perhaps most importantly for Roman thinking, it restored the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, that criminal acts were thought to disturb. In this last purpose, we see how deeply religious thinking infused Roman justice. Crime was not merely a violation of human law, but a disruption of cosmic order that required ritual correction. This perspective helps explain some of the more unusual punishments we will explore in coming chapters, practices that might seem bizarre or excessive to modern sensibilities, but that made perfect sense within the Roman worldview. As the night grows quiet and the city sleeps, the river continues to flow, a fitting metaphor for the stream of Roman legal thought that would eventually merge into broader currents of Western jurisprudence. Many fundamental concepts of modern law owe their existence to Roman innovation: the presumption of innocence, the right to face one's accusers, the principle that punishment should be proportional to the offense, the understanding that intent matters in determining culpability. Yet alongside these enduring contributions, the Romans also developed forms of punishment so distinctive and, at times, so dramatic that they still capture our imagination 2 millennia later. These practices, from the symbolic death of exile to the elaborate ritual of the Poena Culi, from the spectacular punishments of the arena to the posthumous disgrace of damnatio memoriae, reveal a society that approached justice with both philosophical sophistication and theatrical flair. The stars wheel slowly overhead as our first night of contemplation concludes. The Tiber continues its ancient journey through the sleeping city, carrying the whispers of countless stories yet to be told. As we prepare to explore the most unusual punishments of ancient Rome, we do so not with morbid fascination, but with curiosity about what these practices reveal about the Roman understanding of justice, order, and human nature. In the gentle darkness beside the flowing river, we begin to understand that to study Roman punishment is to study not just the mechanics of penalties and process, but the soul of a civilization, its values, fears, beliefs, and aspirations. The Romans, like all societies before and since, created systems of justice that reflected their deepest understandings of right and wrong, order and chaos, mercy and retribution. Their methods may sometimes seem foreign to our modern sensibilities, but the questions they wrestled with remain as relevant today as when the first laws were inscribed on the 12 tables beside the eternally flowing Tiber. As the first light of dawn touches the eastern hills, painting the white marble of Rome in soft pink hues, a solitary figure stands at the Porta Capena, the southern gate of the city. He carries only what he can wear and a small bundle of essential possessions. By sunset he must be beyond the forbidden boundary, miles away from the only home he has ever known. He is an exile, banished from Rome, sentenced to live out his days under foreign stars, severed from the sacred heart of his world. Exile represented one of Rome's most distinctive and psychologically sophisticated punishments. Unlike execution, which ended a criminal's life in a moment, exile extended punishment across years or even decades. Unlike imprisonment, which confined the body but kept the offender within society's boundaries, exile preserved physical freedom while imposing a social death. For a civilization that placed supreme value on citizenship and belonging, being cast out represented a fate that many Romans considered worse than death itself. Imagine yourself walking beside this exile as he passes through the gate, perhaps for the last time. The morning air carries the scent of wood smoke and baking bread, the familiar perfume of city life that will soon be only a memory. The stones beneath your feet are worn smooth by countless passing travelers, yet for the exile, each step now carries the weight of departure rather than arrival, of loss rather than possibility. To be Roman is to belong to Rome, went an ancient saying. The exile's punishment was profound precisely because it stripped away this essential belonging. Roman identity was not merely a legal status, but a complex weave of religious, social, and political connections. To be exiled meant being cut off from one's ancestors, gods, family rituals, political rights, and social networks. A comprehensive severance that left the individual spiritually as well as physically displaced. The practice of exile evolved significantly throughout Roman history, reflecting changes in both legal thinking and political reality. In the early Republic, a form of voluntary exile called exilium existed as an unofficial alternative to capital punishment. A citizen facing a death sentence could choose to flee Rome before the formal verdict, accepting perpetual banishment in exchange for preserving his life. This practice acknowledged both the state's authority to punish and the citizen's dignity to choose his fate. As the sun climbs higher, casting shorter shadows across the Via Appia that stretches before the departing exile, consider how this informal practice gradually evolved into a formal punishment. By the late Republic, courts could impose relegatio, relegation, or deportatio, deportation, as official sentences. Relegation typically specified a minimum distance from Rome or confinement to a particular location, often an island, while allowing the exile to retain citizenship and property. Deportation represented the more severe form, stripping the offender of citizenship and confiscating their possessions. The experience of exile varied dramatically depending on the exile's wealth, connections, and the specific terms of his banishment. For the wealthy and well-connected, exile might mean retiring to a comfortable villa in Naples or Athens, surrounded by luxuries, and visited by friends brave enough to associate with a political outcast. Indeed, certain locations became known as colonies of exiles, where Romans living under banishment created miniature versions of the society they had left behind. For those of more modest means, or those who had fallen from greater heights, exile often meant genuine hardship. Without financial resources or useful skills, a banished Roman might find himself begging in foreign streets or selling his labor for sustenance, all while carrying the stigma of criminal status. The poet Ovid, exiled by Augustus to Tomis on the Black Sea coast, lamented his fate in verses that still evoke the pain of displacement. Here I am, a Roman among barbarians. My only crime was an error, not deliberate wrongdoing. By midday, our exile has left the immediate outskirts of Rome behind. He pauses at a small shrine beside the road, perhaps offering a final prayer to the gods of his homeland. In this moment, we might reflect on the religious dimension of exile. To be banished from Rome meant separation from the religious rituals and sacred sites that connected Romans to their gods. Unable to participate in festivals, sacrifices, and ceremonies that structured the Roman religious year, the exile experienced a form of spiritual amputation alongside his geographic displacement. This religious aspect reveals an important distinction in Roman thinking about punishment. Exile was not merely a practical removal of a problematic individual from society, but a ritual exclusion that preserved the community's spiritual integrity. By casting out those who had committed serious offenses, Rome maintained its pax deorum, the essential peace with the gods that guaranteed the city's prosperity and security. The exile carried away not just his physical presence, but the spiritual pollution of his crime, purifying the community through his absence. As afternoon light gilds the countryside, our exile continues his journey. Perhaps he encounters other travelers on the road, merchants bringing goods to the capital, pilgrims traveling to sacred sites, soldiers returning to their legions. Each passing face represents a connection to the life he is leaving behind, a reminder of all that his punishment has cost him. For in Rome's status-conscious society, exile meant not just geographic displacement but social death, a complete loss of position, influence, and identity. This social dimension helps explain why exile was often the punishment of choice for political offenses, particularly among the elite. A senator who plotted against the emperor, or a wealthy equestrian who abused his provincial authority, might be banished rather than executed, preserving his life while neutralizing the threat he posed to the established order. Equally important, exile removed the offender from his networks of power and influence, isolating him both physically and socially. The soft afternoon light begins to fade into evening as our exile seeks shelter for his first night away from Rome. In this moment of transition from day to night, we might contemplate another important aspect of Roman exile, its potential temporality. While some forms of banishment were permanent, others were limited to specific periods or could be revoked through political changes or imperial clemency. This uncertainty created both hope and additional torment for the exile, who might spend years or decades suspended between the possibility of return and the reality of displacement. History provides numerous examples of famous Romans who experienced exile's bitter taste. Cicero, the great orator and statesman, was banished in 58 BCE for executing Roman citizens without trial during the Catilinarian conspiracy. Though his exile lasted less than 2 years before political allies secured his recall, his letters from this period reveal profound psychological suffering. I am not only prevented from being in my country, but even from seeing it. What have I to look forward to? What hope remains? Similarly, the poet Ovid spent his final decade exiled to Tomis, writing plaintive verses begging for Augustus's forgiveness that never came. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, endured 8 years of banishment to Corsica before being recalled to serve as Nero's tutor, only to later be forced into suicide when he himself fell from imperial favor. These prominent cases reveal exile's use as both judicial punishment and political tool, a flexible instrument for removing problematic individuals while avoiding the finality of execution. As stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, our exile finds a modest inn for the night. These stars, the same stars that shine over Rome, now take on new significance, for they are perhaps the only familiar sight he will retain in his new existence. Under their cold light, we might reflect on the philosophical dimensions of exile as the Romans understood it. Stoic philosophy, which influenced Roman thought, significantly taught that true exile was impossible for the wise person who carried his virtue with him wherever he went. Seneca, writing from his own banishment, observed, "What does it matter where you are? You should live anywhere as if it were home." Yet even Seneca acknowledged the emotional reality that contradicted this philosophical ideal. Why am I surprised? If all mankind cannot comfort me in my misery when I cannot comfort myself. This tension between philosophical acceptance and human longing characterized many accounts of Roman exile. The punishment worked precisely because it targeted something fundamental in the Roman psyche, the deep-seated need to belong, to be connected to one's origins, to live and die within the sacred boundaries that defined one's place in the cosmos. To be cast beyond those boundaries was to experience a kind of living death, a twilight existence in which one breathed and moved but no longer fully lived. Night has fully claimed the sky now, and our exile lies awake in unfamiliar surroundings. The sounds and scents are not those of his Roman home. The bed beneath him belongs to no place he knows. In this moment of intimate solitude, we approach the heart of exile's punishment. The inescapable awareness of severance, the knowledge that one has been cut off from the source of one's being. This awareness would accompany the exile through every day of his banishment, a constant companion more faithful than any he had known in Rome. Yet even in this darkness, certain lights remained. Some exiles found unexpected freedom in their displacement, discovering aspects of themselves that might never have emerged within Rome's rigid social structures. Others found solace in philosophy, literature, or new human connections formed in their places of banishment. Many wrote extensively during their exile, letters, poems, treatises, creating permanent records of this distinctive punishment that allow us to understand its psychological dimensions across the centuries. As the night deepens and our exile finally drifts into uneasy sleep, we might reflect on how banishment revealed fundamental truths about Roman society. The effectiveness of exile as punishment depended entirely on the exile's attachment to Rome, to its physical spaces, social connections, religious practices, and political rites. In this sense, exile functioned as the mirror image of Roman belonging, defining through absence what it meant to be fully present within the embrace of the eternal city. The stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars that have watched over Rome since its founding, and will continue long after our own brief moment in time concludes. Under their patient light, countless Roman exiles began new lives far from the city they loved, carrying with them memories of what they had lost and questions about what they might yet become. In their stories of displacement and occasional return, we glimpse not just the mechanics of a distinctive Roman punishment, but the deeper meaning of belonging, identity, and home, questions that continue to resonate across the centuries under stars both foreign and familiar. In the stillness before dawn, when the world hovers between night and day, a somber procession winds its way through Rome's sleeping streets. Torches cast flickering shadows against ancient walls as priests, magistrates, and solemn-faced citizens make their way toward the Tiber River. At the center of this procession walks a condemned man, his face covered with a wolf's skin, his feet shod in wooden shoes, his hands bound behind his back. He is about to experience one of Rome's most bizarre and symbolically rich punishments, the poena culae, the punishment of the sack. The offence that merited this extraordinary penalty was equally extraordinary: patricide, the killing of one's father, or by extension one's mother or close blood relative. In a society built upon the absolute authority of the paterfamilias and the sacred bonds of family, this crime represented not merely murder, but a fundamental violation of natural and divine law. It demanded a punishment that matched its transgressive nature, a ritual of purification as much as retribution. Imagine yourself among the silent witnesses as the procession reaches the riverbank. The eastern sky has begun to lighten, though the sun itself remains hidden below the horizon. This liminal hour, neither night nor day, seems fitting for a punishment that will transpose its victim between states of being neither fully alive nor granted the dignity of proper death. The condemned man stands now at the edge of flowing water, perhaps hearing for the last time the gentle sounds of the Tiber that has nurtured Rome since its founding. Officials prepare the cullius itself, a carefully sewn sack made of leather or coarse cloth, large enough to contain a human and several animals. For this is the truly remarkable aspect of the poena culae. The patricide would not die alone, but in the company of strange bedfellows. Let him who has violently taken the life of his parent be sewn into a sack with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and an ape, and let the sack be thrown into the depths of the sea or the nearest river. So decreed the ancient law, creating one of history's most symbolically complex punishments. Each element carried deliberate meaning, turning a simple execution into a profound ritual statement about the criminal and his offense. The wolf-skin mask placed over the condemned's face represented his reversion to a bestial state through his unnatural crime. By killing a parent, he had rejected his humanity and become something savage, outside the boundaries of civilized behavior. The wooden shoes prevented him from directly touching the earth. Mother Earth, who would be polluted by contact with such an unnatural creature. Even in these preliminary steps, we see how the poena culae functioned not just as punishment, but as purification ritual, protecting Rome from the spiritual contamination of patricide. As the morning light strengthens, the official proceedings begin. A judge or magistrate pronounces the formal sentence, though the proceedings lack the elaborate theatricality of other Roman punishments. The poena culae was solemn rather than spectacular, a necessary removal of pollution rather than a public entertainment. The relatively small crowd maintains respectful silence, witnessing justice not with bloodthirsty enthusiasm, but with the gravity the occasion demands. The condemned is now directed to step into the waiting sack. Perhaps he does so with resignation, perhaps with terror or defiance. The historical records rarely capture these intimate human moments. What they do record with remarkable consistency across centuries are the animals that would join him in this strange final journey. First comes the dog, an animal Romans associated with shamelessness and base behavior, yet also with loyalty. Its inclusion suggested that the patricide had betrayed the most fundamental loyalty of all, that between child and parent. Next, the rooster, a creature known for aggression toward its own kind, symbolizing the unnatural violence the criminal had committed against his own blood. Then the viper, believed by Romans to kill its mother at birth, making it nature's patricide, the animal embodiment of the human crime. Finally, and perhaps most strikingly, the ape, an unsettling approximation of human form, lacking human reason or virtue. The ape represented the patricide himself, reduced to a grotesque imitation of humanity through his violation of natural order. Together, these animals created a microcosm of the crime's perversion, a theatrical representation of broken natural law, sewn literally into the same space as its human violator. By now, the rising sun has touched the waters of the Tiber with golden light. Officials finish securing the sack, drawing tight the cords that seal the condemned and his animal companions into their shared fate. The moment of execution has arrived. With ceremonial dignity rather than cruel haste, the sack is carried to a waiting boat, rowed to the river's deepest point, and committed to the waters. The symbolic significance of drowning, as opposed to more common Roman execution methods like crucifixion or beheading, reveals yet another layer of meaning. Water represented purification in Roman religious thinking. By consigning the patricide to the river, Rome washed away both the individual and the pollution of his crime. Moreover, drowning within a sack prevented the condemned's body from touching either earth or the open air, elements that Romans believed would be contaminated by contact with such profound transgression. As the sack disappears beneath the Tiber's surface, ripples spreading outward in diminishing circles, we might reflect on the remarkable psychological sophistication of this punishment. The poena culi admits not just physical death, but a complex, symbolic unmaking of the criminal's humanity. By denying him direct contact with earth, sky, and finally water, the punishment systematically removed him from the elements that sustained life. By surrounding him with symbolic animals, it relegated him to a subhuman category. By drowning him within an enclosed sack, it denied him the dignity of being seen in his final moments. The small crowd begins to disperse as the morning brightens into full day. Some may offer prayers to household gods or to Jupiter, giving thanks that cosmic order has been restored through this ritual removal of its violator. Others might reflect on the object lesson they have witnessed, a powerful reminder of the sanctity of family bonds in Roman society and the consequences of their breach. The historical record suggests that the poena culae, for all its dramatic symbolism, was relatively rarely applied. It appears in legal texts across centuries of Roman history, from the early Republic to the late Empire, yet specific documented cases remain few. This rarity likely stems from multiple factors: the uncommon nature of patricide itself, the legal complexities of proving such a serious charge, and periods when the punishment fell out of favor, replaced by other penalties like exile or simpler forms of execution. Emperor Hadrian is recorded as having modified the punishment in some cases, allowing the condemned to be thrown directly to wild beasts in the arena rather than sewn into the sack, perhaps a concession to the public's growing appetite for spectacular entertainments. Constantine later revived the traditional form, though with Christian rather than pagan religious overtones. This evolution demonstrates how the poena culae, like many Roman punishments, adapted to changing social and religious contexts while maintaining its essential symbolic core. As midday approaches and life in Rome returns to its normal rhythms, the morning's somber ritual recedes into memory. The Tiber continues its eternal flow, carrying away all evidence of the punishment it has helped administer. Yet something has been accomplished beyond the simple removal of one criminal from society. Through the elaborate symbolism of the poena culae, Rome has made a statement about its fundamental values: the sanctity of family bonds, the natural order that sustains human society, and the cosmic consequences of their violation. This philosophical dimension elevates the poena culae beyond mere punishment into the realm of religious ritual and social reaffirmation. By responding to patricide with such elaborate symbolic process, rather than simple execution, Rome demonstrated its understanding that some crimes threaten not just individual victims, but the conceptual foundations of society itself. The punishment sought to heal this breach in the natural order, to restore balance between human community and divine law. The afternoon sun now shines fully on the city, life continuing as it has for centuries along the Tiber's banks. In taverns and markets, the morning's execution might become a topic of subdued conversation. Unlike the gladiatorial games or public crucifixions, the poena culae generated not excitement but solemn reflection, a reminder of boundaries that must not be crossed, of bonds that must not be broken. For a modern observer, this peculiar punishment might seem excessively theatrical or even cruelly bizarre. Yet within the Roman worldview, with its complex understanding of cosmic order, family structure and ritual purification, the poena culae possessed a certain terrible logic. It matched an unnatural crime with an unnatural death, a violation of family bonds with a grotesque parody of community, a rejection of human obligation with a removal from the human element. As shadows lengthen with the approaching evening, we might reflect on what this distinctive punishment reveals about Roman society more broadly. The elaborate symbolism of the poena culae demonstrates Rome's understanding of punishment as communication, not just to the criminal or even to potential wrongdoers, but to the gods, to nature itself, and to the abstract concept of justice. Every element conveyed meaning, transforming a simple execution into a complex statement about Roman values and cosmic order. The stars appear once more as night reclaims the sky, the same stars that have witnessed countless applications of Roman justice across the centuries. Under their patient light, the Tiber continues its journey toward the distant sea, having once again served as instrument of Rome's most symbolic punishment. The condemned man has vanished from the human community as completely as if he had never existed. His body denied burial, his name perhaps officially forgotten, his crime expunged through the elaborate ritual of the cullius. In this erasure lies perhaps the deepest meaning of the poena culae. Beyond physical death, it imposed a kind of cosmic unbeing, a removal so complete that it addressed not just the criminal's life, but his place in the order of existence. For a civilization that placed supreme value on remembrance through ancestor worship, funeral masks, and family lineages, such comprehensive erasure represented a fate truly worse than simple death. It was an unmade life, a severed thread in the tapestry of Roman society, a cautionary void where once a citizen had stood. So concludes our exploration of one of Rome's most distinctive punishments, a practice both alien to modern sensibilities and revealing of ancient ones. In the poena culae's strange combination of animals, elements, and symbolic actions, we glimpse not just the mechanics of Roman justice, but its soul, the deep structure of beliefs, fears, and values that gave meaning to its most unusual expressions. As we continue our journey through Rome's remarkable penal practices, this understanding of punishment as both practical action and symbolic communication will illuminate even its most seemingly bizarre manifestations. The first rays of morning light filter through the upper arches of the Colosseum, illuminating dust motes that danced like golden spirits above the arena floor. In these quiet hours before Rome awakens, the great amphitheater stands empty, yet somehow expectant, as if the very stones remember the spectacles they have witnessed. The sand covering the arena floor, the arena that gave the space its name, lies smooth and pristine, betraying no hint of the dramas that will unfold upon it when the sun climbs higher and the crowds begin to gather. This sand has absorbed the blood of countless gladiators, exotic animals, and condemned criminals. It is this last group that concerns our present exploration. those who faced one of Rome's most spectacular forms of execution, damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Unlike the solemn ritual of the poena culae or the political calculation of exile, this punishment transformed death into public entertainment, merging judicial sentence with theatrical spectacle in a manner uniquely Roman. Imagine yourself arriving as the Colosseum begins to fill with spectators. People from all walks of Roman life stream through the numbered entrances. Senators in togas with purple borders, equestrians in their distinctive attire, ordinary citizens in simpler clothing, even slaves accompanying their masters, or running errands for the game's organizers. The anticipation in the air is palpable, a complex mixture of religious solemnity, entertainment excitement, and social occasion. For the arena was never merely a place of entertainment. It was a religious space where sacrifices occurred before the games began. It was a political forum where emperors demonstrated their generosity and connected with the public. It was a social arena where Rome's complex hierarchies were displayed through seating arrangements and dress codes, and it was, of course, a judicial venue where certain criminals met their state-mandated end in a manner designed to maximize both retribution and deterrence. As the sun rises higher and the amphitheater fills to capacity, the day's program begins. Animal hunts typically occupied the morning sessions, followed by executions at midday, with gladiatorial combats as the afternoon's main attraction. This schedule was no accident. The executions were deliberately positioned when the sun stood, directly overhead, casting no shadows that might offer even symbolic shelter to the condemned. Justice would be administered in the full, merciless light of day. The criminals scheduled for execution wait in holding cells beneath the arena, perhaps hearing the muffled roars of the crowd above and the distant growls of the beasts that will soon serve as instruments of their punishment. Not all are destined for damnatio ad bestias. Some will be crucified in the arena, others burned alive, still others forced to kill each other as reluctant gladiators. But those condemned to the beasts face a fate that Romans considered particularly appropriate for certain categories of offenders. Who were these unfortunates? Historical records indicate that damnatio ad bestias typically applied to slaves who had attacked their masters, to perpetrators of particularly heinous murders, to those guilty of sacrilege or temple robbery, and notably to Christians who refused to renounce their faith and acknowledge the divine status of the emperor. What linked these diverse offences was their perceived attack on the fundamental order of Roman society, either its hierarchical structure, religious foundations, or basic security. The crowd's murmur swells to a roar as the midday executions begin. A procession enters the arena, guards escorting the condemned, arena attendants carrying equipment, perhaps priests performing brief rituals to sanctify the proceedings. For despite its entertainment value, this was still the administration of justice, requiring proper religious observance to maintain cosmic order. The first group of condemned criminals is led to the center of the arena. They wear simple tunics or loincloths, their feet bare against the sand that will soon absorb their blood. Some may bear signs indicating their crimes, ensuring the crowd understands the judicial purpose behind the spectacle they are about to witness. Unlike gladiators who entered with ceremony and the possibility of victory, these individuals arrive with no illusions about their fate. From gated chambers around the arena's perimeter come the beasts, perhaps lions imported from North Africa, bears from the forests of Gaul, leopards from Asia Minor, or bulls from Hispania. The Romans went to extraordinary lengths to acquire exotic animals for their games, creating trade networks spanning the known world. These creatures, often starved before the event to ensure aggression, represent both the might of Rome's reach across distant lands and the natural forces that human law seeks to channel and control. What follows is a scene of controlled chaos that modern sensibilities find difficult to comprehend. Some of the condemned might be tied to stakes or structures in the arena, unable to flee or defend themselves. Others might be given minimal weapons. Not enough to truly fight, but sufficient to prolong the spectacle. Still others might be forced into theatrical reenactments of mythological stories with lethal endings, dying not just as criminals but as characters in Rome's cultural narratives. The poet Martial described one such mythological execution where a criminal was forced to play the role of Laureolus, a notorious bandit from Roman literature. Rather than being crucified as in the original story, this Laureolus was exposed to a bear that literally tore him apart, transforming literary justice into grotesque reality. These fatal charades, as modern scholars call them, added narrative, structure, to what might otherwise be simple slaughter, elevating execution into a form of brutal performance art. As midday heat beats down upon the arena, the sand gradually darkens with blood. The crowd's reactions vary. Some watch in solemn silence, seeing justice fulfilled. Others cheer each killing as entertainment, while still others look away during the most graphic moments. This range of responses reflects the complex nature of Roman spectacle, which served simultaneous purposes of judicial punishment, religious ritual, political demonstration, and public entertainment. For the condemned facing the beasts, these final moments represented not just physical agony but profound humiliation. Roman culture placed tremendous value on dying with dignity, facing one's end with courage, composure, and appropriate ritual. Damnatio ad bestias denied all these comforts, reducing humans to prey, transforming death from sacred transition to public spectacle, and often leaving bodies too mauled for proper burial rites. The punishment attacked not just life, but identity itself, stripping away the condemned's humanity before finally taking their breath. This dehumanization served both practical and symbolic purposes. Practically, it reinforced social hierarchies by demonstrating the consequences of challenging established order. Symbolically, it represented the cosmic justice of nature, reclaiming those who had violated natural law through their crimes. By dying beneath tooth and claw rather than by human hand, the condemned were returned to a natural order they had allegedly disrupted through their offences. As afternoon approaches and the arena attendants rake fresh sand over blood-stained ground, preparing for the gladiatorial contests to follow, we might pause to consider the deeper meanings of this spectacular form of punishment. Why did a civilization sophisticated enough to create aqueducts, develop complex legal codes, and produce profound philosophy also stage such brutal public executions? The answer lies partly in Roman religious thinking, which viewed public punishment as necessary for maintaining pax deorum, peace with the gods. Crimes disrupted divine order, requiring visible correction to restore cosmic balance. The public nature of arena executions transformed private wrongdoing into communal resolution, allowing the entire society to witness justice restored. Equally important was the political dimension. Arena spectacles demonstrated the state's absolute power over life and death, graphically illustrating the consequences of defying authority. When an emperor presided over the games, he physically embodied this power, deciding which condemned might receive mercy through the famous thumbs-up gesture, actually signifying swords up, sheathe your weapon, and which would face their scheduled fate. The psychological impact on spectators should not be underestimated. These displays simultaneously entertained through their dramatic elements while reinforcing social norms through their judicial function. They provided cathartic release for communal tensions while channeling potentially dangerous emotions into state-sanctioned outlets. For a population with few other forms of mass entertainment, arena spectacles offered unparalleled sensory and emotional stimulation within carefully controlled boundaries. As the sun begins its western descent and shadows gradually reclaim the arena floor, the day's executions have concluded. Those condemned to the beasts have met their fate, their remains removed from public view, their names perhaps already fading from memory. The crowd now focuses on the gladiatorial combats, professional fighters whose skills and courage offer a different kind of spectacle, one where the outcome remains uncertain and survival possible, unlike the inevitable deaths of the damnatee. The historical record suggests that damnatio ad bestias continued regularly throughout centuries of Roman history, with periodic variations in frequency and specific implementation. During certain periods of Christian persecution, the practice gained particular notoriety as believers faced the beasts rather than renounced their faith. The early Christian writer Tertullian noted bitterly that Christians alone are forbidden to claim the arena's damage, referring to the denial of proper burial to those executed there. As evening approaches and the great amphitheatre begins to empty, spectators returning to their homes throughout the city, the arena stands once more in temporary silence. Fresh sand covers all evidence of the day's events, ready to absorb tomorrow's blood as it has for generations. The beasts return to their cages beneath the structure, perhaps to appear again at future games, perhaps to be featured in specialized hunts where their deaths, rather than human ones, provide the entertainment. In this twilight hour, with the Colosseum silhouetted against the darkening sky, we might reflect on the strange contradiction at the heart of damnatio ad bestias. A punishment that seemed to reduce humans to the level of animals actually reinforced distinctly human concepts: justice, retribution, hierarchy, order. A spectacle that appeared chaotic and bloodthirsty followed careful rules and religious protocols. A death that looked meaningless and arbitrary carried profound social and cosmic significance within Roman understanding. The stars emerge overhead as night claims the sky completely, the same stars that witnessed countless arena spectacles throughout centuries of Roman history. Under their ageless light, the great amphitheatre stands as both monument and mausoleum, a place where justice and entertainment, religion and politics, life and death intertwined in uniquely Roman fashion. The sand rests quietly now, but memory preserves what it once absorbed, carrying the echoes of ancient punishments forward through time like whispers from a distant shore. Tomorrow, when dawn returns and the cycle begins anew, different individuals may face the beasts or other forms of arena execution. Yet the fundamental pattern remains consistent: Rome's justice made visible through spectacular punishment, its social order reinforced through public demonstration, its religious obligations fulfilled through ritualized violence. In this elaborate dance of performance and punishment, we glimpse not just specific Roman practices, but the deeper structures of a civilization that understood justice as theatre and execution as both conclusion and commencement of cosmic order. Among teeth and claws beneath the unforgiving midday sun, Roman justice found one of its most distinctive expressions. Not in the quiet rationality of its legal codes, but in the visceral impact of its most public punishments. The arena's sand, now silent and still beneath the night sky, waits to receive tomorrow's stories. Tales written not in ink, but in blood, not on parchment, but on the collective memory of a civilization that understood death as both ending and spectacle, both punishment and performance. Evening settles over the Forum Romanum as the last golden rays of sunlight catch the tops of marble columns, casting long shadows across the heart of ancient Rome. Workers gather their tools, preparing to depart after a day of unusual labor. They have not been building or repairing, but systematically erasing, chiseling away a name from inscriptions, removing a face from relief carvings, toppling statues from their pedestals. By imperial decree, someone once prominent is being methodically eliminated from the city's memory, subjected to one of Rome's most psychologically sophisticated punishments, damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, in a culture that placed supreme value on remembrance, that maintained ancestral masks in household shrines and recited family lineages at funerals, that inscribed names on monuments meant to last centuries. The deliberate erasure of an individual from history represented a punishment more profound than mere execution. It attacked not just the body but the very existence of the condemned, removing them from Rome's collective consciousness as if they had never been born. Imagine yourself walking through the Forum as this erasure unfolds. Here, a work crew carefully removes a statue, not with the casual destruction of vandals, but with the methodical precision of officials carrying out a formal sentence. There, stonemasons chisel away a name from a dedicatory inscription, the marble dust catching the fading light as it falls to the ground. Nearby, painters apply fresh pigment to a public fresco, obscuring the figure of the condemned with new imagery. The atmosphere is not one of angry mob vengeance, but of administrative process, the state systematically implementing forgetting. Though modern scholars coined the term damnatio memoriae, the Romans developed multiple formal and informal procedures for erasing individuals from public memory. The Senate could decree that a person's name be struck from public records, their statues destroyed, their property confiscated, their wills invalidated. Even the accused's family might be compelled to remove all images of their condemned relative from household shrines, severing the crucial link between the living and the dead that anchored Roman family identity. As night falls completely and torches are lit to continue the work of erasure, consider who might receive this extraordinary punishment. Most commonly, it targeted political figures who had fallen from grace, emperors overthrown in palace coups, failed usurpers, officials deemed traitors to the state. Emperors Caligula, Nero, Domitian, and Commodus all suffered versions of memory condemnation following their deaths, their names struck from official records, their images defaced or reworked into representations of their successors. The practice served practical political purposes. A new emperor could distance himself from an unpopular predecessor by literally removing evidence of the former regime. Potential supporters of the condemned might be discouraged by the visible demonstration of their patron's complete fall from power. The erasure created an official version of history that supported the current power structure while warning others of the consequences of challenging it. Yet beyond these practical functions lay deeper symbolic meanings. The Romans believed that a form of immortality existed through remembrance, that one lived on through the memories of descendants, through images preserved in household shrines, through names inscribed on public monuments. Damnatio memoriae attacked this post-mortem existence, imposing a second death more permanent than the first. It represented not just punishment of the body or confiscation of property, but the attempted annihilation of identity itself. The night deepens as workers continue their systematic erasure by torchlight. In a private home nearby, family members of the condemned might be engaging in parallel activities, removing ancestral images from their household shrine, burning personal letters and documents, perhaps even avoiding mention of their relative's name in conversation. The erasure extended from public spaces into private ones, from official records into personal memories, creating a comprehensive program of forgetting. The effectiveness of this memory condemnation varied greatly. Some individuals disappeared so completely that we know of their existence only through archaeological evidence, where erasure was incomplete, a name partly visible beneath later inscriptions, a face recognizable despite deliberate damage, written references that escaped destruction. Others, paradoxically, became more memorable through the very effort to forget them. The conspicuous absence of Caligula from official histories, the obvious erasures of Domitian from public monuments, called attention to the condemned even as they removed direct evidence of their existence. As midnight approaches and even the dedicated workers finally depart, leaving their task to continue tomorrow. The Forum stands in moonlit stillness. The shadows hide the fresh marks of chisels, the empty pedestals where statues once stood, the modified inscriptions with their conspicuous gaps. In this quiet moment we might reflect on the philosophical implications of attempting to erase a life from collective memory, of rewriting history through deliberate forgetting. The practice reveals a sophisticated understanding of how public memory functions, through visible reminders, through names spoken and written, through images encountered in daily life. By systematically removing these prompts to remembrance, Damnatio Memoriae sought to control not just the historical record, but the cognitive processes of Rome's population. Without reminders, would memories fade? Without public validation, would private recollections seem increasingly uncertain? The punishment banked on fundamental characteristics of human memory, its social nature, its dependence on external cues, its malleability over time. Yet the very efforts to erase often preserved evidence of the condemned's existence. A chiseled-out name leaves a distinctive void in an inscription. A reworked portrait often retains traces of the original features. Records of the Senate decree ordering memory condemnation necessarily mention the name they seek to eliminate. These paradoxes create what modern scholars call conspicuous erasure, absence that draws attention to itself, forgetting that preserves evidence of what should be forgotten. As the night hours stretch toward dawn, imagine the dreams of those who knew the condemned, family members, associates, ordinary citizens who had seen the now removed statues or read the now altered inscriptions. In these private mental spaces, memories might persist despite official efforts at erasure. A father might still recall his condemned son's face, a friend might preserve stories of shared experiences, enemies might secretly celebrate their rivals' fall, while maintaining outward conformity with the mandate to forget. This tension between official erasure and private remembrance reveals the limits of state power, even in authoritarian systems. Memory could be driven underground, forced into silence, removed from public spaces. But could it be truly eliminated? The historical evidence suggests otherwise. Many subjected to damnatio memoriae nevertheless managed to leave traces in the historical record, their very condemnation sometimes ensuring a place in history their undisturbed monuments might not have guaranteed. The first light of dawn touches the eastern horizon, gradually illuminating the Forum with its conspicuous absences and modified monuments. A new day begins in a landscape altered by the previous day's erasures, yet still bearing traces of what came before. This palimpsest quality, where new inscriptions appear over partially erased older ones, where reworked portraits reveal hints of original features, serves as apt metaphor for memory itself, with its layers of recollection, forgetting, and reinterpretation. Morning brings renewed activity to the Forum as workers return to continue their task of erasure. Over days or weeks, depending on the condemned's prominence, their presence will be systematically removed from Rome's physical landscape. Yet even as this official process unfolds, informal networks of memory continue their own work, preserving, through private conversation, through written records kept hidden from authorities, through stories told in intimate settings, what public monuments no longer acknowledge. This dialectic between erasure and preservation characterizes damnatio memoriae throughout Roman history. Official condemnation might remove an emperor's name from monuments, yet chroniclers like Suetonius and Tacitus preserved accounts of their reigns, sometimes in unflattering detail. The Senate might order statues destroyed, yet some were hidden rather than demolished, buried to protect them from destruction, or secreted to private villas outside immediate imperial scrutiny. The mandate to forget often competed with the human inclination to remember the dramatic, the controversial, the significant. By midday, the forum bustles with its usual activities: merchants conducting business, citizens gathering to hear public announcements, priests performing rituals at various temples. Life continues around the spaces of erasure, gradually accommodating the altered landscape. Perhaps older citizens notice the changes, remembering what once stood on now empty pedestals, or what names once appeared in modified inscriptions. Younger ones might grow up never knowing what has been removed, their understanding of history shaped by these deliberate omissions. This generational dimension reveals another aspect of damnatio memoriae's effectiveness. Given enough time, natural, forgetting reinforces official erasure. Those with personal memories of the condemned eventually die. Oral traditions become diluted or disappear. Hidden records may be lost or destroyed by accident rather than design. The condemnation of memory, partially effective in the short term, might achieve greater success across generations as living recollection gives way to documented history with its conspicuous gaps. The afternoon sun illuminates the forum fully, now revealing the extent of alteration. Certain patterns emerge in how erasure was implemented. Faces systematically damaged on relief sculptures, names precisely excised from inscriptions, statues removed, but surrounding monuments left intact. This selective targeting demonstrates the careful calibration of damnatio memoriae, which sought to remove the specific individual while maintaining the broader historical context their existence had inhabited. Such precision distinguished memory, condemnation from broader forms of destruction. This was not the razing of a conquered city or the wholesale elimination of a defeated people's culture. Rather, it represented surgery on the body of historical memory, carefully excising specific elements while preserving the surrounding tissue. The sophisticated understanding of how memory functions collectively and how identity depends on social recognition made damnatio memoriae a uniquely powerful and distinctly Roman form of punishment. As evening approaches once more, and shadows again lengthen across the forum, the day's work of erasure nears completion. Perhaps only specialists would now notice the evidence of the condemned's former presence. The slightly different texture of stone where a name was removed, the stylistic inconsistencies in a reworked portrait, the unusual spacing in a modified inscription. For ordinary Romans going about their daily lives, the landscape has been successfully altered, the official narrative restored to approved continuity. Yet in private spaces throughout the city, memory continues its parallel existence. A trader who conducted business with the condemned might mentally note the empty pedestal where their statue once stood. A relative might maintain a hidden image preserved against the day when political fortunes might change and rehabilitation become possible. A chronicler might record details of both the condemned's life and their subsequent erasure, creating the historical traces through which modern scholars reconstructed the practice centuries later. This interplay between public forgetting and private remembrance, between official erasure and unofficial preservation, makes damnatio memoriae one of Rome's most fascinating punishments. Unlike execution, which removed the physical person, or exile, which removed their physical presence. From Rome, memory condemnation attempted to remove their very existence from collective consciousness. Its ambition was total, its success always partial, its implications profound for understanding how identity depends on social recognition and remembrance. As night falls once more over the Forum, with its newly modified monuments gleaming pale, in the moonlight we might reflect on the modern resonance of this ancient practice. Societies still struggle with how to remember disgraced figures, how to address historical wrongs, how to manage public monuments to controversial individuals. The questions raised by Damnatio Memoriae about who controls historical narrative, about the relationship between public and private memory, about whether erasure represents justice or merely another form of power, continue to challenge us across the centuries. The stars emerge above the sleeping city, the same stars that witnessed countless cycles of remembrance and forgetting throughout Rome's long history. Under their patient light, the Forum's altered landscape tells stories not just about those whose names and images were preserved, but about those deliberately removed, their absence as eloquent as others' presence, their erasure as revealing as others' celebration. In the spaces between monuments, in the gaps within inscriptions, in the reworked faces of portraits, Damnatio Memoriae achieved not complete forgetting, but a distinctive form of remembrance, one defined by intentional absence, by the visible, evidence of attempted invisibility. As you drift towards sleep tonight, gentle listener, consider how our own identities exist, not just in our physical being, but in the web of memories, recognitions, and acknowledgements that surround us. The ancient Romans understood this profound truth, that we exist as much in others' minds as in our own bodies, as much in collective memory as in individual experience. Their attempt to punish through erasure, to condemn through forgetting, reveals both the power and the limitations of social memory. For even those officially erased left traces, whispers, shadows, reminders that human existence permeates the world in ways too complex and profound to be completely undone, even by the mightiest empire the ancient world had ever known. As dawn breaks over the city of Rome, painting ancient temples and humble insulae alike in soft, golden light, a different kind of spectacle unfolds in a small square near the Forum. A crowd has gathered to witness punishment, but not an execution or exile. Instead, a man stands with a forked wooden yoke secured around his neck, the furca that gives this punishment its name, the poena sub furca. The wooden frame forces his head to remain bowed, his shoulders bearing both the physical weight of the device and the symbolic burden of public shame. For the next several hours he will remain in this position, visible to all who pass by, his offence perhaps written on a tablet hanging from the yoke itself. Beyond the most infamous Roman punishments that have captured historical imagination lie numerous lesser-known penalties that reveal much about Roman society, values, and understanding of justice. These punishments, ranging from the mildly uncomfortable to the deeply humiliating, formed a spectrum of options available to magistrates and judges, allowing them to calibrate consequences precisely to both crime and criminal. In exploring these less dramatic but nonetheless significant penalties, we gain insight into the everyday functioning of Roman justice rather than just its most extreme manifestations. Imagine yourself walking through Rome's busy streets as morning activities commence. Near the Basilica Julia, you notice another form of public punishment. A man stands bound to a wooden post, a sign detailing his offence, perhaps debt or minor theft, displayed prominently beside him. This is the poena ad palum, a penalty that subjected offenders to public display rather than physical harm. The purpose was humiliation rather than injury, shame rather than suffering. a recognition that in status-conscious Roman society, reputation damage could be more effective than bodily pain. This emphasis on shame highlights an important aspect of Roman punishment philosophy: the understanding that humans are social creatures vulnerable to community judgment. For citizens, especially, public humiliation represented a particularly effective deterrent, threatening the dignitas, dignity or status, that Romans valued so highly. The most sophisticated Roman penalties recognized that psychological consequences often proved more lasting and effective than physical ones. As the morning progresses and you continue your imagined journey through ancient Rome, you might encounter someone undergoing another distinctive punishment, wearing the toga inversa, literally an inside-out toga. This seemingly simple penalty carried profound symbolic weight. The toga, Rome's distinctive formal garment, represented citizenship, itself when worn properly. To wear it incorrectly, turned inside out, improperly draped, or inappropriately colored, publicly announced one's violation of social norms and temporary exclusion from the community of respected citizens. Many Roman penalties incorporated this element of visual signaling, transforming the punished person's appearance to communicate their transgression to others. A soldier who showed cowardice might have his distinctive military belt removed, publicly marking his failure to uphold martial values. A woman convicted of adultery might be required to wear the toga, normally reserved for male citizens, signaling her deviation from prescribed female behavior. These visible markers turned punishment into ongoing communication, extending consequences beyond the moment of sentencing into daily social interactions. By midday, the forum buzzes with activity, legal proceedings, commercial transactions, religious observances and social gatherings overlapping in Rome's civic center. Here you might witness another form of punishment being implemented, the interdictio aquae et ignis, literally the forbidding of water and fire. This penalty, falling short of full exile, prohibited anyone from providing the condemned with these essential elements, symbolically cutting them off from the community while allowing them to remain physically present. Unable to receive hospitality or conduct normal social interactions, the punished individual experienced a form of living death, physically present but socially non-existent. This concept of social death appears in numerous Roman penalties. The infamia, a legal status imposed for certain offenses, stripped individuals of various civic rights while allowing them to remain in Rome. Those declared infamous might lose the right to vote, to hold office, to serve as witnesses in court, or to represent others in legal proceedings. They remained citizens technically but lost the meaningful privileges of citizenship, creating a graduated form of civic punishment that didn't require the extreme step of exile. As afternoon approaches, your path might take you past one of Rome's law courts, where sentences are being pronounced for various offenses. For property crimes, you might hear a judge decree not execution or exile, but monetary damages, often multiplied beyond the actual value of what was stolen or damaged. The principle of multiple damages appears throughout Roman law, with penalties of double, triple, or even quadruple the original amount, depending on the nature and severity of the offense. This approach aimed to make victims whole while adding a punitive element that distinguished compensation from mere restitution. The sophisticated gradation of financial penalties revealed Rome's understanding that not all crimes warranted bodily punishment or civic exclusion. For many offenses, especially those involving property rather than violence, proportional financial consequences proved more appropriate and effective. The system recognized different categories of wrongdoing requiring different approaches to justice, a nuance sometimes overlooked when focusing only on Rome's most severe punishments. As the sun begins its descent and shadows lengthen across The city, you might pass the Campus Martius, where yet another form of punishment is visible, forced labor on public works. Individuals convicted of certain offences might be sentenced to opus publicum, compulsory work on roads, aqueducts, or other infrastructure projects. This penalty served multiple functions simultaneously. It punished the offender through physical. Labor repaid society through practical contribution, and visibly demonstrated to the community both the consequence of crime and the authority of the state to command personal service. This productive dimension distinguished certain Roman punishments from purely retributive approaches. While some penalties focused exclusively on making the criminal suffer or removing them from society, others harnessed the offender's labor toward public benefit. This practical aspect reflects the Roman genius for efficiency. Even punishment could serve constructive purposes, turning wrongdoers' efforts toward community improvement rather than merely warehousing or eliminating them. Evening approaches, and as you make your way through Rome's crowded streets toward home, you might encounter one final example of Roman punishment, a man wearing distinctive clothing that marks him as having been subjected to the fustuarium, a military punishment involving beating with clubs. Though he survived this potentially lethal discipline, many did not. His appearance now signals his status as one who violated military discipline, yet was permitted to continue living. His punishment, though physically concluded, continues through this visual identification and the social consequences it carries. This concept of ongoing consequence characterized many Roman punishments. Even after the active phase of penalty concluded, the time in the wooden yoke finished, the beating with rods completed, the period of forced labor served, the effects continued through official status changes, social memory, and sometimes visible markings. Punishment extended beyond the moment of implementation into the fabric of daily life, altering how the individual was perceived and treated by the community around them. As night falls completely over Rome and oil lamps illuminate windows throughout the city, we might reflect on how these lesser-known punishments reveal the remarkable sophistication of Roman penal thinking. Beyond the dramatic extremes of crucifixion or damnatio ad bestias lay a carefully calibrated spectrum of penalties designed to match specific offenses, account for the social status of the offender, and serve multiple social purposes simultaneously. The physical punishments, flogging with rods, fustigatio, beating with clubs, fustuarium, or exposure in the wooden yoke, poena sub furca, provided visible demonstrations of state authority and immediate consequences for wrongdoing. The status punishments, infamia, removal of rank indicators or distinctive clothing requirements, leveraged social pressure and community enforcement to extend consequences beyond direct state action. The practical penalties, monetary, damages, property confiscation, or forced labor, addressed material harm while sometimes providing tangible benefits to victims or society. This sophisticated system allowed Roman judges to consider not just the criminal act itself, but the specific circumstances, the offender's background and status, the harm caused, and the example that punishment would set for others. Unlike systems with mandatory penalties for broad categories of crime, Roman justice permitted remarkable judicial discretion, enabling punishment to be tailored to the unique aspects of each case while still operating within established legal frameworks. The stars emerge fully overhead now, watching, as they have for millennia, as Rome sleeps beneath their unchanging light. The man who spent the day in the wooden yoke has been released to return home, his formal punishment complete, yet its social consequences only beginning. The individual bound to the post has been untied but faces the neighbors who witnessed his humiliation. The soldier who endured the fustuarium tends his wounds while contemplating his diminished status among his comrades. Throughout the city, countless others bear the invisible marks of infamia, financial penalties, or other judicial consequences integrated into the social fabric, yet altered by their encounter with Roman justice. What distinguishes these lesser-known punishments from their more dramatic counterparts is their emphasis on reintegration rather than permanent exclusion. Unlike execution, exile, or damnatio memoriae, these penalties generally assumed the offender would remain within the community, though with altered status or diminished privileges. They recognized that most wrongdoers would continue as members of society, their punishment serving as both personal consequence and public communication about the boundaries of acceptable behavior. This presumption of continued social participation reveals an important aspect of Roman justice that more sensational accounts sometimes overlook. For all its potential severity in extreme cases, the system generally aimed to maintain social cohesion while enforcing norms, to punish yet preserve, to impose consequences while allowing for eventual recovery of status and function. The dramatic punishments we often associate with Rome were in fact exceptional rather than routine, reserved for the most serious crimes or highest-profile offenders. As the night deepens and the city sleeps beneath the watchful stars, we might consider how these lesser-known Roman penalties continue to influence our own concepts of justice. The principle of calibrating punishment to both crime and criminal, the understanding that shame and status can be more powerful motivators than physical pain, the recognition that penalties should serve multiple social purposes beyond mere retribution. These insights from ancient Rome remain relevant to contemporary discussions of effective and just punishment. The wooden yoke, the public post, the inside-out toga, and other visible markers of Roman penalties have faded into history, yet their philosophical underpinnings persist in modern practices like community service, financial restitution, and supervised probation. Even as we have rejected the more extreme Roman punishments as cruel by contemporary standards, we have preserved and developed many of the principles that guided their more moderate penalties: proportionality, reintegration, and social communication through consequences. In this continuity across millennia, we recognize that while specific punishments may change with evolving moral sensibilities and cultural contexts, the fundamental questions of justice remain remarkably consistent. How should society respond to wrongdoing? What purposes should punishment serve? How can consequences be made proportional to offenses? What balance should be struck between retribution, deterrence, and rehabilitation? Rome's answers to these questions differed in many ways from our own, yet the questions themselves would be immediately recognizable to Roman jurists and magistrates. As dawn approaches once more and the stars begin to fade from the lightening sky, we conclude our exploration of these lesser-known Roman penalties. They may lack the dramatic impact of arena executions or the philosophical complexity of memory condemnation, but in their practical implementation of justice in everyday contexts, they perhaps reveal more about Roman society than their more extreme counterparts. In the wooden yoke, the financial penalty, the status reduction, and the forced labor, we glimpse not just how Rome punished its most notorious offenders, but how it maintained daily order among ordinary citizens, navigating the complex demands of ancient urban life. The first rays of morning light touched the forum once more, beginning another day in the eternal city. The machinery of Roman justice continues its work. Magistrates preparing to hear cases, lictors standing ready to implement sentences, citizens going about their business with awareness of both their rights and their responsibilities under law. The lesser-known punishments we have explored formed essential components of this system, allowing it to address the full spectrum of human wrongdoing with responses calibrated to maintain social order while acknowledging human complexity. In their nuance and sophistication, these penalties remind us that Roman justice, for all its occasional harshness, aimed ultimately at preserving the community by responding to wrongdoing with consequences both meaningful and measured. The mist hangs low over a Roman military encampment as dawn breaks, casting an ethereal quality over the ordered rows of tents and the silent figures of sentries standing watch. In the center of the camp, surrounded by the standards of the legions, with their golden eagles catching the first light, a space has been cleared. Soldiers gather in formation, their expressions solemn, their armor immaculate despite months of campaign. They have been summoned not to march against an enemy, but to witness judgment upon their own, a demonstration of the legendary discipline that made Rome's legions the most formidable military force the ancient world had ever seen. Military discipline in Rome operated according to its own distinctive code, separate from civilian justice, though sharing certain philosophical foundations. The legions demanded absolute obedience, unwavering courage, and perfect loyalty. Values essential, not just for military effectiveness, but for the very survival of the units themselves. Violations of these expectations triggered punishments specifically designed to reinforce the values they protected, creating a disciplinary system as organized and effective as the military machine it served. Imagine yourself standing among these legionaries as morning light strengthens, revealing the full assembly of the legion, perhaps 5,000 men arranged in precise formation according to their centuries and cohorts. At the center of this human rectangle stands a small group. Officers in their distinctive uniforms, the legions Aquilifer, holding the sacred eagle standard, and several soldiers under guard. These last are the focus of the gathering, men who have in some way violated the strict code that governs legionary life. Roman military discipline won the world, wrote the historian Valerius Maximus, and indeed contemporary accounts repeatedly attributed Rome's military success not to superior numbers or equipment, but to the extraordinary discipline maintained within the legions. This discipline was enforced through a system of punishments that ranged from minor penalties for small infractions to extreme measures for the most serious violations. Each was designed not merely to punish the individual, but to reinforce collective values and deter similar offenses throughout the ranks. As the sun rises fully above the horizon, the camp's commanding officer steps forward to address the assembled troops. His voice carries across the silent ranks, explaining the offenses committed and the sentences determined. Perhaps he reminds them of the oath each took upon joining the legion, the sacramentum that bound them to obey orders, never desert their post, and place the welfare of Rome above their own lives. This sacred oath transformed military service from mere employment into religious and moral obligation, giving disciplinary punishments dimensions beyond simple penalty. The proceedings begin with the castigatio, verbal reprimand delivered publicly before the assembled troops. Though seemingly mild compared to physical punishments, this public shaming carried significant weight in a culture where honor and reputation represented essential values. To be singled out for failure before one's comrades imposed psychological consequences that could prove more lasting than bodily pain. For minor first offenses, this public humiliation might constitute the entire punishment, its effectiveness deriving from the close-knit nature of military units where respect of fellow soldiers often mattered more than life itself. For more serious infractions or repeated minor offenses, additional penalties followed. A soldier might be sentenced to pecuniary fines, pecuniaria multa, deductions from his already modest salary that represented both practical consequence and symbolic demonstration. That failure in duty carried tangible cost. Others might receive the munerum indictio, assignment to extra duties that separated the offender from his comrades during rest periods, adding physical exertion to the psychological isolation of being marked as one who had failed to meet standards. As the disciplinary proceedings continue, more severe punishments are implemented. Several soldiers step forward, perhaps those who abandoned their posts during sentry duty or showed cowardice during a skirmish. They are stripped of their distinctive military belts, cingulum militare, the physical manifestation of their status as legionaries. This cashiering ceremony, gradus deectio, reduced them to a position lower than ordinary soldiers, visibly marking their failure and serving as constant reminder to all who saw them of the consequences of violating military trust. For certain categories of offence, particularly those involving physical discipline breakdowns, corporal punishment follows. The centurion steps forward with the vites, the vine staff that served as symbol of his rank and instrument of discipline. Soldiers guilty of insubordination, breaking formation, or similar physical infractions receive a measured beating, calibrated to cause pain and humiliation without permanently impairing fighting ability. This fustuarium, beating with clubs or rods, represented standard discipline for infractions serious enough to warrant physical correction but not severe, enough to merit capital punishment. The morning progresses, and the atmosphere in the camp grows increasingly solemn as more serious cases are addressed. Now we approach punishments reserved for the gravest military offences: desertion, surrendering a position without orders, sleeping on sentry duty, or mutiny. These violations struck at the very foundation of military effectiveness, potentially endangering entire units or even campaign outcomes. The penalties matched this severity, designed not just to punish individuals but to create deterrent so powerful that even in extremis, soldiers would choose death in battle over the consequences of breaking discipline. Among these severe punishments, none carried more dreadful significance than decimatio, decimation. Though relatively rare in practice, this punishment's very existence demonstrated the absolute priority Rome placed on collective discipline. When a unit had shown exceptional cowardice or mutinous behavior, 1 soldier in 10 would be selected by lot for execution. The terrible genius of this system lay in its implementation. The 9 soldiers not selected were required to beat the 10th to death themselves, binding them to the punishment through direct participation and demonstrating that maintaining discipline was the responsibility of every legionary, not just commanders. Imagine the psychological impact of such a scene. Men who had fought side by side, shared meals and hardships, now forced to become executioners of their comrades based on random selection rather than individual guilt. The trauma of participation likely proved as effective a deterrent as the fear of being selected. Even units never subjected to decimation knew of its possibility, the threat alone sufficient to maintain discipline in circumstances where individual courage might otherwise falter. Beyond these formalized punishments lay unofficial consequences, equally important in maintaining military discipline. A soldier who had shown weakness might find himself subtly ostracized by comrades who feared his failure could endanger them in future engagements. One who had received punishment might face permanent damage to his prospects for promotion or recognition. The close-quarter living conditions of campaign life meant that reputation followed a soldier constantly, with no escape from the judgment of peers who depended on his reliability for their very survival. As midday approaches in our imagined disciplinary assembly, the most serious cases have been addressed, punishments implemented, and examples made. The commanding officer perhaps concludes with remarks reminding the assembled legionaries of their collective purpose and the necessity of absolute discipline in achieving it. The standards are raised, their eagles glinting in the sunlight, and normal camp activities resume: training exercises, equipment maintenance, meal preparation, and the 100 other tasks that occupied legionary life between battles. White distinguishes Roman military discipline from mere cruelty was its carefully calibrated nature and clear connection to practical necessity. Each punishment corresponded to specific categories of offense, with escalating severity for repeated infractions. The system recognized degrees of culpability, distinguishing between failures of courage, judgment, or loyalty. Most importantly, punishment always served the greater purpose of maintaining the effectiveness of the legion as a fighting force, the welfare of the whole taking absolute precedence over the individual. This practical foundation extended even to the most severe punishments. A soldier executed for sleeping at his post died not simply because he had broken rules, but because his lapse potentially endangered hundreds of his comrades. One who deserted faced extreme penalties because a single example, if unpunished, might spread like contagion through troops facing similar hardships. The collective nature of military operations required collective discipline, with each soldier understanding that his actions or failures affected not just himself, but the entire unit. As afternoon shadows lengthen across the encampment and legionaries go about their duties, we might reflect on how this disciplinary system contributed to Rome's extraordinary military success across centuries. The legions conquered and held territories from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Nile, often against numerically superior forces. They adapted to diverse opponents and environments while maintaining consistent effectiveness. This remarkable achievement stemmed not from innate Roman superiority, but from the disciplinary system that transformed ordinary men into components of a military machine of unprecedented reliability and resilience. The discipline extended beyond punishment to positive reinforcement. Soldiers who displayed exceptional courage or effectiveness received public recognition and tangible rewards, military decorations, dona militaria, promotion to higher ranks, or financial bonuses. This balance of consequence and reward created a comprehensive motivational system encouraging adherence to the legion's demanding standards. The most severe punishments remained relatively rare, precisely because the entire structure effectively shaped behavior through both positive and negative incentives. Evening approaches, and as cooking fires are lit throughout the camp, perhaps, conversations among the legionaries turned to the day's disciplinary proceedings. Veterans might explain to younger soldiers the necessity of what they witnessed, contextualizing seemingly harsh measures within the realities of campaign life and battle demands. This informal reinforcement, the cultural transmission of values between generations of soldiers, formed an essential component of the disciplinary system, creating internal motivation that supplemented external enforcement. The distinctive aspect of Roman military discipline lay in its consistency across vast geographic distances and time periods. A legionary serving in Britain under Hadrian would recognize the same basic disciplinary structures as one who had served in Spain under Augustus a century earlier. This continuity created institutional memory and reliable expectations. Soldiers knew precisely what consequences would follow particular actions, removing ambiguity that might otherwise undermine disciplinary effectiveness. As night falls, completely over the encampment and the first watch takes up their positions, oil lamps illuminate tent interiors where legionaries prepare for sleep. Those who witnessed punishment earlier that day carry its lessons into their dreams, the example reinforcing their own commitment to meeting the legion's exacting standards. Those who received minor corrections adjust their behavior to avoid more serious consequences. Those who implemented the most severe penalties perhaps struggle with their role, yet understand its necessity within the system that protects them all. The stars wheel overhead, the same stars that watched over countless similar encampments throughout centuries of Roman military dominance. Under their unchanging light, the disciplinary system of the legions maintained the fighting effectiveness that translated imperial will into territorial reality. From Scotland's misty highlands to Syria's sun-baked plains, Roman military discipline created not just fearsome fighting units, but an institutional culture that survived political upheavals, leadership changes, and the passage of generations. In the quiet of night, with most of the camp asleep except for vigilant sentries, we might consider how these ancient military punishments influenced subsequent military traditions. Many armies, throughout history, adopted elements of Roman practice, the emphasis on public example, the graduated nature of penalties, the concept of collective responsibility, the balance of positive and negative motivation. Even in modern military organizations, echoes of Roman discipline remain visible in ceremonies of demotion, in systems of non-judicial punishment, and in the fundamental principle that military discipline constitutes a separate legal domain with its own standards and procedures. Dawn will soon approach again, beginning another day in the life of the legion. The disciplinary proceedings we witnessed represent not an exceptional event, but a regular component of military routine. The constant maintenance of standards that allowed Rome's eagles to fly victoriously across the known world. In their sophisticated understanding of how to balance severity with purpose, how to shape human behavior through consistent consequence, and how to forge individual soldiers into collective fighting force, the Romans created not just an effective army but a model of disciplinary practice that would influence military thinking for millennia to come. As sleep claims the exhausted legionaries and peace temporarily descends upon the encampment, the disciplinary system continues its quiet work, shaping dreams, influencing decisions not yet made, preparing men to face tomorrow's challenges with the courage and discipline that transformed Rome from small Italian city-state to mistress of the Mediterranean world. In this balance of fear and pride, consequence and reward, individual responsibility and collective identity, the genius of Roman military discipline reveals itself, not as mere brutality, but as sophisticated psychological engineering that created history's most consistently effective fighting force through the careful calibration of blood and discipline. The sun rises over the ancient city of Rome, illuminating 7 hills that have witnessed a civilization's remarkable journey through time. The light catches the curves of the Colosseum, built in the imperial age, before touching the rectangular foundation of the ancient Curia in the Forum, home to the Republican Senate centuries earlier. These architectural contrasts reflect a deeper evolution, the transformation of Rome from modest republic to vast empire, a journey that profoundly shaped how justice was conceived, administered, and experienced across nearly a millennium of continuous development. Roman punishment did not emerge fully formed like Minerva from Jupiter's brow, but evolved gradually through distinct phases, each reflecting the changing nature of Roman society itself. This evolution tells a story not just of specific penalties, but of shifting values, expanding territorial reach, and the fundamental transformation of political authority from distributed republican institutions to increasingly centralized imperial power. Imagine yourself walking the ancient streets as morning vendors set up their stalls and citizens begin to move through the gradually awakening city. If you could somehow compress time, seeing these same streets across centuries rather than moments, you would witness this evolution of justice unfold before your eyes, from the intimate, community-based punishment of early Rome to the elaborate, bureaucratized system of the later empire. In Rome's earliest days, when the city remained little more than a collection of settlements on the 7 hills, punishment operated primarily through family and clan structures rather than formal state mechanisms. The paterfamilias, the male head of household, held extraordinary power over family members, including the theoretical right of life and death, vitae necisque potestas. Justice was personal, immediate, and deeply embedded in kinship networks, with formal public involvement reserved for disputes between families or cases affecting the broader community. This early approach reflected practical necessity in a society without professional judges, permanent courts, or substantial administrative infrastructure. It also embodied distinctly Roman values: the centrality of family, the importance of personal honor, and the understanding of wrongdoing as disruption of relationships rather than abstract violation of laws. Punishment sought primarily to restore harmony within the community rather than enforce abstract legal principles. As the morning progresses and you continue your imagined journey through Roman chronology, you witness the development of the Republic and its increasingly formalized approach to justice. The creation of the 12 Tables around 450 BCE marked a crucial transition, codifying previously unwritten customs and making law accessible to ordinary citizens rather than the exclusive domain of patrician elites. This democratization of legal knowledge represented a distinctively Republican value, the belief that citizens should understand the rules governing their behavior. Republican punishment reflected the era's political structure, with its carefully balanced institutions and distributed authority. No single individual could impose penalties independently. Instead, justice emerged through complex interaction between magistrates, the Senate, popular assemblies, and eventually specialized courts, questiones. This institutional approach created procedural protections for citizens, particularly the right of provocatio, appealed to the people against a magistrate's decision, which served as safeguard against arbitrary punishment. By midday, as you witness Rome's transition from republic to early empire, significant shifts in punishment practices become apparent. The concentration of power in imperial hands gradually transformed the administration of justice. The emperor became the ultimate source of law and final court of appeal, while an expanding bureaucracy extended consistent judicial procedures throughout conquered territories. Punishment became less a community affair and more a demonstration of imperial authority, though significant regional variations persisted across Rome's vast holdings. This period saw the development of more standardized punishments and increasingly formal distinctions based on social status. The categories honestiores, the privileged, and humiliores, the humble, became legally significant, with different penalties prescribed for identical offenses depending on the offender's classification. A member of the senatorial class might face exile for a crime that would bring a common laborer crucifixion, a disparity justified through the belief that different social positions created different expectations and sensitivities to punishment. As afternoon light casts longer shadows across your historical journey, you observe how punishment in the Middle and later Empire reflected broader societal changes. The extension of citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire in 212 CE through the Constitutio Antoniniana created new questions about who deserved citizen protections. The gradual integration of Christianity influenced penal philosophy, introducing concepts of penance and redemption alongside traditional Roman emphasis on deterrence and retribution. Economic pressures and administrative challenges led to increasing use of fines and forced labor, rather than more resource-intensive forms of corporal punishment. Throughout these transformations, certain continuities persisted. Roman punishment consistently distinguished between public crimes, crimina publica, that harmed the state or social order, and private wrongs, delicta privata, that primarily injured individuals. It maintained the principle that punishment should generally fit both the crime and the criminal's social position. And it preserved the understanding that punishment served multiple, simultaneous purposes: compensating victims, deterring potential offenders, removing dangerous elements from society, and satisfying divine requirements for justice. The evolving physical settings of punishment reflected these broader changes. Early republican penalties often occurred in the immediate community where offenses took place, creating direct connection between wrongdoing and consequence. The Middle Republic saw increasing centralization, with the forum serving as primary location for both trials and punishments, emphasizing their public nature and connection to civic institution. The imperial period brought purpose-built facilities like the Colosseum, where punishment transformed into spectacular entertainment while simultaneously demonstrating imperial munificence and power. As evening approaches in your temporal journey, you might observe how methods of execution evolved over centuries of Roman history. Early Republic executions often employed relatively simple methods like throwing from the Tarpeian Rock or strangling in the Tullianum prison. The late Republic and early Empire saw increasing elaboration and differentiation, with crucifixion, exposure to wild beasts, and burning, developing as distinctly Roman approaches to capital punishment. The later empire, influenced by changing sensibilities and practical considerations, sometimes favored less publicly graphic methods like beheading for higher status offenders. Similarly, approaches to non-capital punishment showed significant evolution. The Republican preference for public corporal punishment, particularly beating with rods, the fasces carried by lictors as symbols of magisterial authority, gradually gave way to more varied imperial penalties, including condemnation to mines, or public works, which served both punitive and practical purposes by addressing labor shortages in essential industries. The increasing use of incarceration as punishment rather than merely pre-trial detention reflected both administrative development and shifting philosophy about appropriate consequences. The geography of punishment expanded dramatically through Rome's evolution, transforming penalties that initially operated within the immediate community into systems that spanned 3 continents. Provincial governors gained significant discretion in administering justice, creating regional variations while still operating within broader Roman frameworks. Islands became designated locations for exile, mines in distant provinces became destinations for the damnati and metallum, those condemned to mining work, and frontier regions received those sentenced to labor on boundary fortifications. This geographical expansion transformed punishment from local demonstration to empire-wide system of control and resource allocation. As night falls on your historical exploration, with stars emerging above Rome's 7 hills, just as they did for countless generations of citizens, subjects, and slaves, you might reflect on how these evolutionary changes in punishment reveal Rome's remarkable capacity for adaptation while maintaining essential continuity through monarchy, republic, principate, and dominate, through expansion from city-state to world empire, and contraction under external pressures. Roman approaches to justice evolved while preserving core principles that defined Roman identity itself. The sophisticated integration of punishment with broader social, political, and religious systems distinguished Roman practice from mere brutality or arbitrary power display. Even at its most severe, Roman punishment operated through established procedures, recognized distinctions between categories of offenses and offenders, and served multiple social purposes simultaneously. This systematic approach, rather than specific penalties themselves, represents Rome's most significant contribution to the history of justice, influencing subsequent legal traditions throughout Europe and beyond. In the quiet of night, with the ancient city sleeping beneath the eternal stars, we might appreciate how studying the evolution of Roman punishment provides insight not just into changing penalties, but into the development of one of history's most enduring civilizations. The journey from family-based justice to imperial bureaucracy, from community enforcement to professional administration, from local application to empire-wide system, parallels Rome's broader transformation from humble beginnings to world power. In punishment, as in architecture, governance, and culture, Rome demonstrated remarkable ability to build upon foundations while adapting to changing circumstances. The various forms of punishment we have explored in previous chapters, exile and banishment, the poena culi, damnatio ad bestias, damnatio memoriae, the lesser penalties, and military discipline, all evolved through this historical progression, developing new applications and meanings as Rome itself transformed. Understanding this evolutionary context enriches our appreciation of these practices beyond their immediate dramatic impact, revealing them as expressions of a dynamic legal tradition responding to changing social realities while maintaining distinctive Roman characteristics. As the deepest hours of night pass and the first hint of dawn approaches once more, we recognize that Roman punishment's evolution never truly concluded but continues through its influence on subsequent legal systems. Elements of Roman practice persist in modern criminal justice. The public nature of trials, the calibration of penalties to both offense and offender, the multiple aims of punishment beyond mere retribution. In studying how Roman punishment changed across centuries, we glimpse not just ancient practices but the origins of concepts that continue to shape how human societies address wrongdoing, maintain order, and conceive of justice itself. The sun will soon rise again over Rome's ancient hills, illuminating ruins that stand as testament to a civilization whose approach to justice evolved from simple community enforcement to sophisticated imperial system. In that evolution, with all its complexities, contradictions, and continuities, we find one of history's most compelling stories, the development of a society that, despite limitations and failures viewed from modern perspective, created legal and punitive systems of remarkable subtlety, durability, and influence. From republic to empire, through centuries of change and adaptation, Roman punishment evolved while maintaining the distinctive character that makes it worthy of study even today, 2 millennia after the eagles flew over the eternal city. The morning sun climbs above the Flavian amphitheatre, the structure we know as the Colosseum, casting dramatic shadows across its massive arches and illuminating the streams of humanity flowing toward its numerous entrances. Thousands of Romans move with purposeful excitement, clutching pottery tickets marked with seat assignments, exchanging predictions about the day's events, perhaps stopping at vendors selling food, souvenirs, or betting opportunities. They have come to witness spectacle, and among the day's offerings will be public punishments, transformed into elaborate performances, merging justice with entertainment in a manner uniquely Roman. The theatrical nature of Roman punishment stands among its most distinctive characteristics. While many civilizations executed criminals publicly, Rome elevated such displays to performance art, creating elaborate productions that communicated multiple messages simultaneously while satisfying the population's appetite for dramatic entertainment. This transformation of punishment into performance reveals much about Roman society, its values, its understanding of justice, its relationship with violence, and its sophisticated use of spectacle as both political tool and social glue. Imagine yourself joining this crowd as it passes beneath the towering arches, following the efficient circulation system that guides different social classes to their designated sections. The design itself communicates Rome's hierarchical values: senators and equestrians in the prime lower seats, ordinary citizens in the middle tiers, and women and slaves relegated to the uppermost levels. Even before any punishment occurs, the very arrangement of spectators reinforces the social order that punitive spectacles were partly designed to protect. By mid-morning, with the amphitheatre now filled to capacity and protected from the strengthening sun by an enormous cloth awning, the velarium, manipulated by sailors from the imperial fleet, the day's proceedings begin. Animal hunts typically occupied the morning session, followed by public executions at midday with gladiatorial combats as the afternoon's main attraction. This careful programming demonstrated sophisticated understanding of audience psychology, building from initial excitement through the grim necessity of justice to the skilled combat that represented the game's most prestigious element. This execution of condemned criminals, noxai as public spectacle, took various forms, each designed to maximize both punitive impact and entertainment value. Some would face simple execution by beasts, damnatio ad bestias, thrown into the arena with lions, bears, or other dangerous animals imported from throughout the empire at enormous expense. Others might be forced to fight each other as untrained. Gladiators, damnatio ad gladium, providing dark parody of the skilled professionals who would perform later. Still others might be compelled to enact mythological scenes with lethal outcomes, known to modern scholars as fatal charades, dying not just as criminals, but as characters in cultural narratives familiar to the audience. The Roman poet Martial described one such mythological execution where a criminal was forced to play Laureolus, a notorious bandit from popular stories. Instead of the fictional crucifixion from the original tale, this Laureolus faced a very real bear that dismembered him before the watching crowd. Another account mentions a criminal enacting the role of Icarus, launched from a high platform, with makeshift wings that predictably failed, sending him plummeting into waiting beasts below. These theatrical deaths transformed punishment from mere elimination of wrongdoers into multi-layered performances that reinforced cultural values while providing macabre entertainment. As the midday sun reaches its zenith, standing directly above, the arena with no shadows to provide even symbolic shelter to the condemned, the executions continue with methodical efficiency. Each death serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It eliminates individuals judged dangerous to society, deters potential wrongdoers through graphic demonstration of consequences, entertains the assembled populace while emphasizing their collective difference from the condemned, and displays the absolute power of the state, often embodied by the emperor himself watching from the imperial box over life and death. The audience's reactions provide insight into how Romans understood these spectacles. Sources suggest responses ranging from enthusiastic bloodlust to philosophical detachment, with many spectators occupying middle ground, accepting executions as necessary justice while judging their implementation according to aesthetic and ethical standards. A good execution for many Romans meant not just that the condemned died, but that they died appropriately, showing courage if they were worthy opponents, or abject terror if they were considered contemptible criminals. Those audience participated actively in this judgment, their collective response forming part of the punishment itself. As afternoon approaches and arena attendants prepare the sand for gladiatorial combats, removing evidence of the executions that preceded them, we might reflect on the complex psychological functions these punitive spectacles served. They created controlled outlet for violent impulses that might otherwise threaten social stability. They reinforced group cohesion by uniting spectators in collective experience that distinguished them from the condemned others facing death. They demonstrated the consequences of challenging authority while simultaneously providing entertainment that potentially distracted from political concerns, the famous bread and circuses that helped maintain social peace. The public nature of these punishments served essential communicative functions in a society where literacy remained limited and official information channels reached only a fraction of the population. Spectacular executions created memorable demonstrations of state power and justice that would be discussed throughout the city, spreading their message far beyond those who personally witnessed them. Stories of particularly dramatic punishments might travel throughout the empire, amplifying their deterrent effect across territories too vast for direct control through constant military presence. The most elaborate punishment spectacles typically occurred in Rome itself, but provinces developed their own versions according to local resources and traditions. Provincial governors traveling with mobile tribunals would schedule executions to coincide with market days or festivals, ensuring maximum attendance and visibility. Local amphitheaters, though rarely as grand as Rome's Colosseum, provided venues for regional punishment performances that maintained the connection between justice and spectacle throughout the empire's far-flung territories. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, casting longer shadows across the Colosseum's sand, we might consider how punishment as performance reflected broader Roman cultural values. The emphasis on public display aligned with general Roman preference for conducting important business in open view rather than behind closed doors. The theatrical elements drew from rich traditions of Roman performance art, from religious rituals to theatrical presentations. The carefully stratified viewing arrangements reinforced the social hierarchy that punishment ultimately served to protect. Religious dimensions of punitive spectacles deserve particular attention. Many executions occurred during festivals with religious significance, creating connection between punishment and divine order. Some criminals were explicitly condemned for religious offenses like temple robbery or sacrilege, their deaths serving as restoration of proper relationship between human and divine realms. Even the scheduling of executions at midday carried religious symbolism. The moment when the sun reached its highest point represented divine witness to human justice, with sunlight revealing truth without shadow or distortion. The relationship between spectators and the condemned contained psychological complexities worth exploring. By witnessing punishments they would never personally experience, ordinary Romans could simultaneously satisfy curiosity about death, release aggressive impulses through vicarious violence, and reassure themselves of their own social conformity and safety. The physical arrangement of the amphitheater, with the condemned isolated in the central arena, while spectators surrounded them in overwhelming numbers, created visual reinforcement of social boundaries between acceptable community members and those deemed beyond redemption. As evening approaches and the day's spectacles conclude, with the amphitheater gradually emptying as spectators return to homes throughout the city, conversations about the punishments witnessed would continue. In households, taverns, and public spaces, these discussions served as important extension of the spectacles themselves, reinforcing their messages while allowing individuals to process their emotional responses. The punitive performances generated not just momentary impact, but lasting social effects through this continued circulation in collective consciousness. The theatrical nature of Roman punishment reveals sophisticated understanding of how justice functions not just as abstract principle, but as communication, as psychological influence, and as reinforcement of cultural values. By transforming necessary eliminations of wrongdoers into elaborate performances that engaged emotions and imagination, Rome achieved multiple objectives simultaneously: maintaining order, providing entertainment, demonstrating power, reinforcing hierarchy, and creating memorable examples that shaped behavior far beyond those directly punished. As night falls completely and the empty amphitheater stands silent beneath the emerging stars, we might reflect on the complex legacy of these punishment spectacles. Their theatrical excess and deliberate cruelty rightly disturb modern sensibilities, yet their sophisticated understanding of how public performance shapes collective behavior continues to influence how justice is communicated and perceived. From televised trials to carefully staged press conferences announcing arrests, from courthouse steps as theatrical venues to prison jumpsuits as visual markers of criminal status, these modern practices echo ancient understanding that punishment operates partly through performance, through visibility, through dramatic demonstration of consequences. The stars now shine fully above the darkened amphitheater, the same stars that witnessed countless punishment spectacles throughout centuries of Roman history. Under their eternal light, the sand that absorbed so much blood has been swept clean, prepared for tomorrow's performances. The elaborate machinery of Roman punitive spectacle, with its theatrical presentations, its careful scheduling, its multiple messages encoded in single events, reveals a civilization that understood justice not just as administration of consequences, but as performance that shaped collective understanding through dramatic demonstration of power, order, and boundary between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. In this theatrical approach to punishment, perhaps more than in any other aspect of their justice system, the Romans revealed both their pragmatic genius for social control and their distinctive cultural preoccupations. They created punitive theatre that simultaneously entertained and terrified, that satisfied bloodlust while channeling it towards sanctioned targets, that eliminated criminals while transforming their deaths into reaffirmations of the very social order they had allegedly violated. This sophisticated merger of punishment with performance stands among Rome's most distinctive contributions to the history of justice. Controversial yet influential, disturbing yet revealing, spectacular, by design yet serving purposes far deeper than mere display. The Roman Forum lies quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, ancient stones patient beneath a sky beginning to lighten from black to deepest blue. Stars still shine overhead, the same stars that witnessed the rise and fall of the empire that gave birth to legal principles still shaping our world today. As first light gradually reveals broken columns and crumbling temples, we conclude our journey through Rome's most unusual punishments by contemplating their lasting influence, the ways ancient practices echo through centuries, informing and challenging our own understanding of justice, retribution, and mercy. Roman punishment, with all its sophistication and occasional severity, represents neither historical curiosity nor simple barbarism, but a complex legacy that continues to shape Western legal traditions. While many specific practices have been abandoned as cruel by modern standards, the principles underlying Roman justice, proportionality, deterrence, public transparency, consideration of intent and circumstance, remain fundamental to contemporary legal systems. In exploring this legacy, we discover not just what we have rejected from ancient practice, but what we have preserved, adapted, and developed. Imagine yourself standing amidst these ruins as dawn light strengthens, illuminating fragments of inscriptions that once proclaimed laws and judgments. The physical remnants of Roman justice lie scattered and incomplete, yet their conceptual foundation remains remarkably intact, transmitted through legal codes, philosophical writings, and institutional practices that survived the empire's political collapse. This survival represents one of history's most significant examples of cultural persistence beyond political continuity, ideas outliving the structures that created them. Perhaps the most important Roman legal legacy lies in procedural rather than punitive practices. The Roman emphasis on established process, on evidence examination, on the right to respond to accusations, and on judgment according to law, rather than personal whim, established principles that would eventually evolve into modern concepts of due process. Even in their most severe punishments, Romans generally insisted on proper procedure, creating distinction between justice and mere vengeance that continues to define civilized legal systems. As morning light fully illuminates the Forum, revealing the Senate House, basilicas where courts operated, and the rostra where some sentences were announced, consider how Roman spatial concepts continue to influence modern justice. Our courtrooms, with their elevated benches for judges, their formal zones for different participants, and their public galleries, echo Roman understanding that justice requires both proper procedure and public witness. The architecture of justice, like so many aspects of Western institutional design, reveals ongoing dialogue with Roman precedent. The Roman classification of offences has similarly shaped our legal categories. Their distinction between crimes against individuals and crimes against the state underlies our division between civil and criminal law. Their recognition of different levels of intent, from deliberate malice to negligence to misfortune, continues in modern assessments of criminal culpability. Their understanding that certain offences primarily harm social order rather than specific victims, informs our concept of victimless crimes and debates about their proper treatment. By midday, as sunlight falls directly on the ancient stones, warming them after the cool night, we might reflect on which Roman punitive practices have been rejected by modern sensibilities and which have evolved into acceptable contemporary forms. Execution remains in some jurisdictions, but without the theatrical elaboration that characterized Roman capital punishment. Exile has transformed into deportation of non-citizens after criminal convictions. Corporal punishment, though eliminated from most Western legal systems, persists in modified forms in some societies. Even damnatio memoriae finds modern parallel in the removal of disgraced figures from public honors. This evolution reveals not simple progress toward civilization, but complex recalibration of values, balancing punitive necessity against humanitarian concerns, deterrent effect against individual dignity, social protection against recognition of universal human rights. The Roman approach to punishment, for all its occasional harshness, contained sophisticated understanding of these tensions, recognition that justice must serve multiple purposes simultaneously, that consequences should reflect both crime and criminal, that punishment carries both practical and symbolic dimensions. As afternoon progresses and shadows begin to lengthen across the forum, casting ancient stones in gentler light, consider how Roman punishment's public dimension continues to influence modern practice. Though we have largely rejected spectacle, execution as cruel, we maintain insistence that justice must be seen to function openly rather than behind closed doors. Court proceedings remain typically public, sentencing occurs in open court, and even prison sentences are most common. Serious punishment are matters of public record. This transparency, first formalized in the 12 Tables public display, represents one of Rome's most significant and enduring legal principles. The Roman emphasis on restitution alongside retribution also continues in modern legal thinking. Their frequent use of financial penalties to compensate victims while punishing offenders parallels our contemporary interest in restorative justice approaches. The principle that wrongdoers should make victims whole when possible, not just suffer consequences themselves, has experienced renewed appreciation in recent decades, suggesting that ancient Roman practice sometimes aligned with values we consider progressive and humane rather than primitive or cruel. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the forum in warm golden light, we might reflect on the most fundamental Roman contribution to punishment philosophy: the insistence that consequences should be proportional to both offense and offender. This principle of proportionality, the punishment should fit the crime and the criminal, remains central to just sentencing despite evolving definitions of what specific proportionality requires. When modern judges consider both the offense and the individual circumstances of the offender, they continue ancient Roman practice of calibrating consequences to particular situations rather than applying rigid, universal penalties. The Roman recognition that different classes of people might experience identical punishments differently has transformed rather than disappeared. While we reject their explicit application of different penalties based on social status as violating equality before the law, our consideration of individual circumstances in sentencing acknowledges the same fundamental insight, that effective and just punishment must consider the specific impact on the particular offender, not just the abstract nature of the offense. This nuanced understanding represents both continuity with and evolution from Roman precedent. As evening approaches and shadows deepen among the forum's ruins, we might consider how Roman punishment's religious dimensions continue in secularized form. Though modern Western legal systems generally separate religious and civil authority, our punishment philosophy retains certain concepts with religious origins. The emphasis on offender acknowledgement of wrongdoing echoes religious confession. Interest in rehabilitation parallels concepts of redemption. Even retributive justifications often contain implicit moral frameworks with roots in religious thinking about cosmic justice. This religious heritage appears most clearly in the concept of mercy, the discretionary mitigation of deserved punishment, based on compassionate consideration of human fallibility. Roman practice included provisions for clemency, particularly from the emperor, as embodiment of state authority. This tradition continues in modern executive clemency powers, presidential pardons and commutations, gubernatorial reprieve, royal prerogative of mercy, creating space for compassion within systems otherwise governed by procedural regularity. The tension between justice's demands and mercy's mitigations, present in Roman practice, remains central to contemporary debates about appropriate punishment. As night falls completely over the forum and stars again emerge overhead, we conclude our exploration of Roman punishment by acknowledging both its failures and achievements. The practices we have examined sometimes reflected cruelty by modern standards, occasionally permitted abuse through insufficient procedural protection, and often enforced social hierarchies we now reject as unjust. Yet they also demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how punishment serves multiple social purposes, how consequences influence behavior beyond individual offenders, and how justice requires both consistency and flexibility to function effectively. Perhaps this complex legacy offers valuable perspective on our own punitive practices and the principles that guide them. By examining how another civilization, neither completely foreign to our values nor perfectly aligned with them, approached questions of wrongdoing and appropriate response, we gain critical distance on our own assumptions. The Roman example reminds us that punishment always reflects cultural values, always serves multiple purposes simultaneously, and always contains both practical and symbolic dimensions deserving thoughtful consideration. The stars shine brightly now above the silent forum, the same stars that witnessed Rome's rise and fall, that looked down upon praetors pronouncing sentences and criminals facing consequences, that watched as an empire built a legal system whose influence would outlast its political boundaries by centuries. Under their patient light, we might find perspective on our own moment in the long human conversation about justice, neither the beginning nor the end of this essential discourse, but participants in continuing exploration of how societies should respond when their members violate communal standards. As you drift towards sleep tonight, dear listener, perhaps you carry with you not just historical knowledge of unusual Roman punishments, but deeper appreciation for the questions they raise, questions that remain as relevant today as when they were first addressed beneath these same stars. How should justice balance retribution and rehabilitation? What role should public demonstration play in punishment's effectiveness? How can consequences be proportional to both offense and offender? When is mercy appropriate alongside justice? These questions echo across centuries, connecting us to those who pondered them in forums and basilicas long crumbled to ruins, yet whose answers continue to shape our understanding of society's response to wrongdoing. May these ancient echoes provide not disturbance, but perspective as you rest, offering reminder that human societies have always sought balance between justice and mercy, between necessary consequences and recognition of shared humanity. The Romans, for all their differences from us, wrestled with the same fundamental challenges of creating social order that both protects and respects those within it. Their solutions, even when we now reject their specific forms, contain insights worth preserving, fragments of wisdom like the marble pieces scattered through the forum, incomplete yet valuable, imperfect yet irreplaceable in our continuing construction of just society. Sleep well beneath the same stars that watched over Rome, connecting us across time to those who first formalized principles of justice still guiding our world today.